Hi there, it's Bonnie with So Inspired by Bonnie with another Tuesday's tip. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm the owner of So Inspired by Bonnie, and I've been sewing all my life, and I love to share tips and tricks with all my fellow sewists. I also, So Inspired by Bonnie is an embroidery and store where we sell embroidery designs as well as glitter flecks. So that's just a little bit about my background. Last week I asked everyone how long they had been sewing, and we had everything from 3 years on up to over 50 years and plus. So there was a wide range of sewists. I love to read all your stories. I heard of one lady that got introduced later in life, and then she had a stroke, and she's learning it all over again because she just loves sewing that much. So there's just a lot of touching stories out there. I'd love to hear it. So let me know where you're coming in from. And I just had to ask this question, which is, what is your most challenging thing to do or involves with sewing? What is your most challenging problem that you run across when you're trying to sew something or embroider something? And maybe if I don't have the answer to that question, maybe one of you will have a solution for that other viewer. So today we're going to discuss stress-free seams. And I know I ran into this a lot. I still do. So I have a solution for that if you run into this issue. What are problems with seams? Well, what I ran into was if you have an open seam, say it's a 1/2 inch or a 5/8 inch seam, maybe it is when you go to cross over another seam, it has a tendency to flip back on you, and then it flips back on you and you're sewing over it, and then you have this big old wad right there, and that's kind of a pain. So out comes the seam ripper to get rid of the wad. And nobody likes to bring out the seam ripper that I know of anyway. And so then you re-sew the seam and press it and hope, pin it down. And then when you remove your pins, sometimes, because you don't want to sew over a pin, so when you remove the pins, sometimes that leaves that seam a little bit wild and free, and it'll flip back on you again. So what can we do to keep those seams from going any which way but the way we want them to go? How do we get those little guys under control? Well, I have a few different solutions for you. As for those of you that have been watching me for a while, you know that I'm a firm believer that there's no one right way to do something. What works for one person might not work for the other person. Maybe they can't find the product where they live. All kinds of scenarios come into play. So I like to try a few different things, and surely one of these will be available for you. But basically, the gist of it is you want to get that seam flat down so that it won't flip on you while you're sewing. Whether you're crossing one seam over to another, or whether you're working with casings. And I found the problem is the biggest headache when it comes to casings, and I'm trying to get that elastic in there, and I'm butting up against a seam allowance that doesn't, you can't get over it. Let me kind of show you here. I have my little pretend shorts that I cut out. I didn't use a pattern or anything, so they're not to scale or anything. They're just kind of an idea. But when you're doing a casing and you've got it rolled over and you've got all those loose seam allowances in there, when you put this elastic in, I a lot of times will use a safety pin, or you can use a bodkin, whatever you prefer. When you're going in there, sometimes you get stuck because you get underneath the seam allowance, and then it just doesn't want to thread. Raise your hand if you've had that happen to you. Tell me I'm not the only one that has had that happen to me. So anyway, here's the solution. What I like to do is let me back up. I used to go in there and maybe do a straight stitch, so it kind of looked like a little top stitching over that area. Now you don't want to completely close your casing. You will have an opening available to you to thread in your drawstring, whether it be a tote bag or a pair of PJs or whatever. But what I like to do is I like to get something in there to kind of glue it into place so that I can thread my elastic. And I have a couple of samples here where one side I used Stitch Witchery, which you can see I've had this in my stash for a while. It's actually turning yellow on me. The packaging is turning yellow. I've had this quite a while. But you can use a little bit of Stitch Witchery in there. If you have a 1/2 inch seam, you might want to use a 1/4 inch wide. If you have a 5/8 inch, you might want to use 1/2 inch wide. But you want it a little bit narrower, but you do want to fuse it right next to the raw edge of your seam so that when it goes down, you don't have anything flipping back on you. And then on the other side, I used Wonder Tape. That worked really well too. And I will demonstrate those two in a minute. But you could also use Heat and Bond Light. Now, I want to stress that it needs to be Heat and Bond Light, not the Ultra. If you do find that you have some Heat and Bond Ultra in your sewing room, please, please mark it not for sewing. It's more for crafts, and it works great for crafts, but not for sewing, because it'll gum up your needle, and it's just a mess when you try to sew with it. Heat and Bond Light is made for sewing, and it will work great. You just want to take a little piece of it. It has a paper backing on it. Your fusibles will work great for this, but just cut it the length you need and the width that you need, either with eyeballing it with your scissors or use your rotary cutter. You can do it either way. Okay, so how do we get these, how do these couple of methods work? I might add that I also had in my stash, because I like to see what I have available to me and not go shopping for new stuff, this Bone Ash 007. And it's a granulated kind of powder deal where you kind of sprinkle it on. It's great for fusing. It stuck really well. I liked that. The problem that I had with it personally was that I could not control exactly where I wanted those little granules to sprinkle out on. And when you're trying to get right under a seam allowance, right against the raw edge so you don't have anything flipping back, for me anyway, it was a little bit harder to control where those granules were going, and I could get into the edge, but not out to the, I should say I could get in towards the seam edge where the stitching line was, but out towards the raw edge was more challenging for me anyway. So this was probably, even though it's a great product for many things, was not my favorite for this particular problem. Okay, so with the Stitch Witchery, and the Stitch Witchery and the Heat and Bond Light work exactly the same. Once you have the size you need, they work pretty much the same. So what you're going to do is, if you're going over an intersecting seam, all you need is just a little piece, maybe a 1/2 inch long, that will go where the seam will cross over. So where the stitching line is going to be that you're crossing over, that's really all you need. You don't need very much, and you're going to fuse that right in underneath the seam allowance back onto the garment or the tote bag, whatever you're sewing on. And that will hold it down so that when you go across, even though you don't have pins or anything else there, you're not going to have any risk of that seam flipping back on you and having a big old knot. I did notice because this was a concern of mine, I did notice with the Stitch Witchery that if it was a seam that I needed to go back in and make an adjustment to, I could pull it off. So here's my seam. I can pull that off. So you can pull it back. It's not going to be super duper permanent. Okay, on the so how do you figure out for a casing? I guess I should go to that next. So I'm unwinding this all over myself. Okay, so if you want to do a casing, how you figure what you need is, generally speaking, you're going to sew down the top raw edge about 1/4 of an inch, and then they'll tell you to either fold it down 1 inch or 2 inches, whatever they tell you to fold it down. You're going to have a width there. So I like to put a little pin, however far they tell me to fold it down in my instruction sheet, and then unfold it, and I see that I have this length, because you want the whole seam that's inside that casing, not just the front side, not just the back half of it, but you've got two halves of that casing. You've got a front part of that casing and you've got a back side to that casing. And so you're going to need the whole length of that. Go ahead and take your ruler and measure that length, which is actually the total width of your casing, and that's how long you're going to cut your fusible, whether it be Stitch Witchery or whether it's going to be the Wonder Under Tape or the Heat and Bond Light. Now, in this instance, I'm pretending that my casing is going to be about 1 inch wide, and my elastic happens to be 3/4 of an inch wide, so that gives me a little wiggle room on my casing. And then I have the 1/4 inch turn under for my top edge of my casing. So 1 inch plus 1 inch is 2 inches, plus the 1/4 inch turn under for this demonstration, and every yours might be different, is going to be 2 1/4 inches is what I need. So I measured off 2 1/4 inches. I measured it a little long here, so I'm going to fix that. You're going to measure off 2 1/4 inches. Put that in the trash. And then you're going to come up to your casing, the casing edge of your, again, tote bag, pajama pants, slacks, whatever you've got going. And I like to just fold it back and then lay it on top of my seam allowance right on the edge. And then you're going to take, with the Stitch Witchery, you're going to take your pressing sheet, you know, a Teflon sheet. This iron is not plugged in, it's not hot. So your iron will be hot, and you're going to fuse it right into place. And then once that's fused in place, you're going to flip your seam allowance back, like so, and you're going to fuse it again, so that you have a nice flat seam allowance that's not going to pop back on you, and when you go to insert your elastic, it's not going to hang up and it's not going to get twisted inside the casing, I should say. That works for cording or elastic, either one. Now, if you're going to use the Wonder Under Tape, and I had a tiny roll, but I lost my tiny roll, you're going to start off the same way. This one has a little bit of a bad edge here, so I'm going to trim that off. I'm going to cut my Wonder Under Tape 2 1/4 inches. And again, the Heat and Bond Light or the other fusibles that you have with a little paper backing are going to be the same. You're going to put them in there, fuse. If it has a paper backing, you'll remove the paper backing and then lay the seam allowance down and fuse again. With the Wonder Under Tape, you're going to take that, cut it to the size you need. I'm going to flip this back again, and I can put that right along the edge, the raw edge of my seam allowance. I don't know if you can see that, but it's right along the raw edge of my seam allowance. And the paper side is sticking up. I peel off the little paper, and sometimes, I admit, this Wonder Under Tape paper is a little bit challenging to remove, especially if you have fake nails like I do. You need them. Okay, so then once you've got that pulled off, the paper pulled off, you're going to lay that seam allowance down, and then you can just finger press it if you want. And then you can go back, place a hot iron on it, and it's going to stay there. I noticed on both of these when I tested this side had the Wonder Tape, and it's a nice strong hold as well. The thing I like about the Wonder Tape is that as soon as this item is thrown into the washing machine, it washes away. So it's going to be gone. and you don't need it in there anymore. So it's really great to have it in there temporarily. It holds that seam allowance down nice and flat. So if you're crossing seams or trying to get seams to stay nice and flat while you're inserting elastic or drawstrings in casings, then that will work really well for you. So I really did like the Wonder Undertape, and I probably thought the Wonder Undertape was my personal favorite, but again, if it's not something you have available to you, you can't find it, certainly the Heat and Bond Light works great, the Stitch Witchery works really well, things of that nature that are like a fusible that you can cut down to size that you need are going to work really, really well. We also have, I wanted to remind everybody, we have a tip at the end from one of our customers that kind of goes along the same theme. I wanted to let everyone know that we do have a new blog on the website over at sewinspiredbybonnie.com, and that blog is called Tips for Classy Holiday Projects, Choosing Embroidery Colors and Fabrics. So you might want to pop over there and check out that new blog that we have just to get those, inspirational juices going on, different holiday projects. But right now, I wanted to see if we had any questions about what we did today with the seam allowances and keeping them under control when you're trying to do casings or any seams that are crossing over. If I don't happen to see your question right now because they do roll over and I don't get to see everybody's questions, I will go through them and answer them when we're not live. So don't worry, if you have a question, you're watching the replay or what have you, I will answer your questions, so please ask away. All right, let's see. Glenda's coming in from Alabama. Margie's in. Hi Margie, long time no see. She's in from Washington. Linda said hello from Port Huron, Michigan. Keeping the machine running smoothly is always a challenge. Also, so many idea projects, fabrics, and even though I'm retired, there's never enough time to do everything I want. Linda, I think we can all relate to that, that there's just never enough time to do everything we want to do. Okay, I'm going to refresh the page again just to make sure we don't have any questions about today's project. Well, not project, but tip. And I'm not seeing, they've already rolled over, so I'm not seeing any of the questions. So let's go on to, and if I have, oh, there might be one. Nope, not seeing. Okay, I thought I might have seen one, but nope, it went on by. I have a little show and tell. This is the next kitty in our Perfect Buddies kitty set that will be released soon. Right now we're releasing them as individuals. This is the Siamese kitty, so I wanted to just give you a little look at that. He is live now. He's available. And we will be releasing a whole set. So if you want the best price, you'll want to wait for the whole set. But they are being released as individuals if you can't wait. Okay, this tip comes from Tammy, and I thought it was very appropriate for today's tip because they kind of go together. She says when she's making a utility quilt, she sews her bindings by machine. When I use regular thread in the top of my machine, and then on the back in the bobbin, I use a fusible thread. You can then press and fuse the binding to the front. So what she's saying is she puts the binding on, she sews the binding to the back first with the fusible thread in the bobbin, which is going to be on the top, and then she folds that binding over to the top where the fusible thread is, and it fuses right down. So when you're doing this, again, sew the binding on the back first, which is a little different than what we're used to. We're used to sewing with the binding on the top and hand stitching on the back. Sew the binding on the back with fusible thread in the bobbin, roll the binding to the top, and then fuse it down in place. I thought that was a very good clip. she likes to use that tip. She said it works really nice, and then she has it nice and even. She can line up her binding to that previous stitching, and she doesn't have to use those Wonder Clips or pins or anything like that. So I thought that was a really good tip from Tammy, and since she sent in a tip that we used on our Tuesday's tip, we're going to send her 5 sheets of our Glitter Flex. Here, 5 sheets of 6x10 Glitter Flex. Let's see if I can get these out. They might be different colors, but we'll send her those. And I know the glitter kind of hides the sparkle. Here's the one without the cover on it. And it adds a lot of super duper pop and color to embroidery projects, or you can use it even just with an iron onto a garment, a t-shirt or whatever. So I've seen a lot of different deals with use for Glitter Flex with embroidery or without. Okay, I'm going to double check and make sure we didn't have any other questions that popped in while I was going over our customer tip from Tammy. Our internet's a little slow today. I apologize. And no, it still looks, I'm sure they're coming in, but it's just kind of locked me off over there. So I will check when we go off air. And I do want to say thank you so much for taking a little bit out of your busy day to spend with me and to see what little tips I have to share with you. So I hope you have a great week in sewing. I hope you have a great week all the way around. And until next week, bye-bye for now.